just mostly important for our presenters, of course, to know, but also for everybody participating. Although you can already see, we don't see you, but you can always reach out to us in the Q&A section of this webinar, which we really urge you to make ample use of throughout the entire event. As you can see, my colleague Sophia shared the house rules. Please make sure that you're always, that you, whenever you experience any issues with the webinar, you can always just log off and log in again. And as we said, ask your questions anytime in the Q&A section. With that being said, we don't have any time to lose. We're gonna go ahead with our first input, and we're being joined from across the pond by Heidi Ellis from Harvard University, who's gonna give us a little talk on trauma and social connection, understanding barriers and opportunities in working with children returning from Iraq and Syria. Heidi is an associate professor in psychology and psychiatry at Harvard Medical School and Boston Children's Hospital. She's also a licensed clinical psychologist. She is also the director of the Trauma and Community Resilience Center at Boston Children's Hospital and a partner in the National Child Traumatic Stress Network. Dr. Ellis' primary focus is on understanding and promoting youth mental health and well-being, with a particular emphasis on understanding how trauma, exposure, violence, and social context impact developmental trajectories. She's a co-developer of the trauma treatment model Trauma Systems Therapy and engaged in capacity building and training related to trauma-informed multidisciplinary approaches to the repatriation and reintegration of children from formerly ISIS-controlled territories. And with this being said, I hand over the floor to you, Heidi.
Thank you so much for that introduction, for the opportunity to be here, and thank you to all the participants for taking time out of your day to be a part of this. I'm more of a Zoom user than a WebEx, so give me a minute while I try and figure out how the share screen works.
See it on the bottom next to the mute,
yep.
Stop input button, and then I
just want to get my slideshow up so we're starting in the right spot. Oh, let's see, we'll get here. Okay.
Otherwise, we can also share it because you hand it over to us. So in this case,
I'm
just
hitting share. Does it?
It should take just a second. Yep, here we go.
Okay. Can everyone see that okay? All right. So as you heard, I'll be talking about trauma and social connection and thinking about how multidisciplinary approaches can help us to promote health and well-being of children returning from Iraq and Syria. Children who spent time under ISIS-controlled areas of Syria and Iraq grew up in the presence of multi-layered, severe, and pervasive trauma. The sources of threat children may have experienced under ISIS control spans multiple levels of the social ecology. Within the family, some may have experienced their parents as protectors, but for others, the parents themselves may have been sources of threat because, as we know, domestic violence and child abuse increase in conflict settings. Even being separated from parents in the context of unknowns and danger, or witnessing parents be terrified and helpless, can be experienced by a child as traumatic. Within the school setting, we also see exposure to trauma. Schools integrated a curriculum that was imbued with violence, so that even a math class used images of bombs or destruction to illustrate concepts. And then stepping out to the societal level, children were exposed to ongoing conflict and war, public executions, and widespread resource deprivation. So unquestionably, we need to grapple with this question. What does this mean for successful reintegration and rehabilitation? To answer this question, I want to start with basic neuroscience behind trauma, then briefly present some of my own research on trauma and radicalization, and then finally take a step back to think about how all of this relates to successful reintegration and rehabilitation programming. Our brains are exquisitely designed to promote survival in the face of threat. The amygdala is the part of the brain responsible for helping us to respond to threat, and it does so by activating our survival systems, typically fight, flight, or freezing responses. This is incredibly adaptive when we are faced with real danger. But when a child lives in an environment of chronic or severe threat, the amygdala can become potentiated, meaning that it begins to respond as if it is facing a true threat, even in settings that are relatively safe. So what this means is that you can take a child out of an unsafe setting, like Al-Hol, and reintegrate them to a much safer context, but their brains may continue to respond to minor stressors in the environment as if their survival was at stake. Within the family setting, resource strain or maternal mental health problems can create sources of stress and perceived threat. Children may also experience ideological or acculturative conflict when they're living with families that reject the teachings that they've grown up with. Within school, children may have experienced significant disruptions to their education, and as a result of their experiences, may have learning difficulties, developmental delays, or both. They may also show social skills deficits that result in biases towards perceiving interactions as threatening. Again, all of this culminates in school as a place of insecurity, fear, and perceived threat. And finally, within society, these children and their families may experience stigma and discrimination, which can lead to perceived or even real threats to their safety. So across the levels of the social ecology, children may continue to experience their environments as threatening, even after resettlement. And this, in turn, can manifest in a range of dysregulated behaviors. Trauma can manifest in a wide range of ways, especially in children, impacting someone's emotions, their behavior, and how they even perceive and process themselves and the world around them. Over time, you can get what are called developmental cascades. If trauma is left untreated, then disrupted functioning in one area begins to affect the normal developmental trajectories in other areas. So you can end up with a cascade of disruptions across multiple domains. What I'm showing here is a hypothetical developmental cascade. And I'll go over in a minute, but I first want to say I put this up here not to forecast that this is what these kids are headed for, but to talk about the importance of prevention. So let me describe what might happen if trauma is left untreated. So an amygdala-driven brain response might be for a child to experience heightened levels of fear, hypervigilance, and nightmares. This, of course, shapes their experience of sleep, their experience of the environment. So you might see that they have poor attention at school, which disrupts their learning. And maybe there's some social withdrawal related to that fear and anxiety they're presenting with. This can manifest over time in loneliness, lagging social skills, poor self-esteem, school failure. And again, if left unaddressed, this might lead to family conflict. Why are you not doing well at school? There's tension in the home. The child might experience depression. They might drop out of school. And of course, we all know that this would lead someone to be vulnerable to terrible outcomes. So what starts as a trauma response in the brain, if left untouched, can have long-term multifaceted consequences. So we need to be in the game of prevention. We need to be doing everything we can to get in early and turn the ship around so that instead of a cascade of problems, we can see a cascade of positive growth. Okay, so how do we do that? Obviously not a simple answer, but the best answer to that question that I know has come from decades of work in child development and is based on the idea that a child is part of a social ecology. Whatever strengths or problems they have interact with the layers of the social ecology around them, for better or for worse. They live in families, go to school, are part of communities and neighborhoods, and at the broadest level are part of a larger nation. Disruptions in any one layer of the social ecology can have profound effects on the developing child at its core. So think for a minute about the kinds of stressors that kids may be facing in the process of reintegration. Adjustment to a new setting, new culture, new language. They may be experiencing developmental delays, lagging skills, or mental health problems. They may face bullying in school or family conflict at home or separation and loss from their caregivers. The community level, they may experience stigma, and at the broadest level of culture, they may feel cultural tension or conflict because their belief systems are not consistent with the society around them. If these disruptions to the social environment can negatively affect development, the good news is that the inverse is also true. Each layer of the social ecology offers an opportunity to create positive growth for the child. So let me illustrate how this works by drawing from my research with Somali refugee young adults. Almost 20 years ago, I started working with Somali refugees in the US, running a community-based participatory research program to understand what promoted positive developmental trajectories among youth who had experienced significant trauma and disruption. When midway into my research, a number of Somalis left the US to join al-Shabaab, and later some joined ISIS, I realized that our research team needed to also understand why some youth were vulnerable to extremist ideas, while the vast majority were not. One of the first things we looked at was trauma. And in fact, we found that having experienced more trauma was associated with greater support for the use of violence for political change. But, and here I want you to remember the picture of that social ecology, this was only true for those who felt stigmatized in their communities or felt disconnected from the United States. Fast forward a few years to a much larger longitudinal study of Somalis in the US and Canada, and again, we found that trauma was associated with more support for violent radicalism, but other experiences in the social environment, like experiencing your government as just, or feeling a positive attachment to the US or Canada for those who lived there, these were protective factors. So within our study sample, we found that the way trauma played out in relation to one very specific outcome, views on violent extremism, was shaped by the levers on the furthest out layer of the social ecology at the level of government and community. So while the research I just showed you illustrates one risk factor, trauma, and how one protective factor, sense of belonging, can buffer its effects, there are, in fact, many different potential risk and protective factors that we could think about targeting across the social ecology. In collaboration with my colleagues Steve Wine, Emma Cardelli, and Zach Brombach, we reviewed the literature on risk and protective factors among other relevant populations, such as former child soldiers or refugees, and identified likely risk and protective factors for children returning from formerly ISIS-controlled territories. We identified risk factors across the level of the social ecology, including, as we have discussed, trauma, but also factors such as parent mental health, bullying in schools, stigma, or inequitable access to resources. Now let's think about protective factors. Protective factors mitigate the impact of risk factors or decrease the likelihood that the presence of a risk factor will lead to a negative outcome, such as violent extremism. Drawing from that same review, we found, again, protective factors across the levels of the social ecology that are likely to be important as we consider R&R programming. At the individual level, something like the presence of hope and optimism, or spirituality and family cohesion, recreational activities, mentorship, opportunities for civic engagement or employment. Across the spectrum, there were many factors that could be leveraged as protective. In my work with traumatized youth in different contexts, I frequently talk about how when you think about trauma using a socio-ecological lens, it multiplies your intervention opportunities. Because we can work not only from the inside out, by providing mental health care to the child, but also from the outside in by thinking about how to build positive experiences throughout the social environment. And this idea has relevance for R&R programming. A whole of society approach allows you to both work at the broader levels of the social ecology to shape more positive outcomes, at the same time that more focused individual and family work can help the children and mothers to overcome challenges they are facing in their own personal and emotional landscape. Doing this, of course, entails much more than an individual discipline or provider. Rather, multidisciplinary teams can integrate resources, knowledge, and approaches from different domains to seek to reduce risk factors and increase protective factors across the social environment and within the individual. As we think about building successful R&R programs for children, we need to be doing two things. We need to be thinking about the kinds of stressors and risk factors they might encounter in the social environment and systematically work to reduce them. And then we need to be thinking about the ways we can build safety, acceptance, and cohesion across the social ecology. Clearly, for a problem like this, there's no silver bullet or one solution. But just as unattended trauma can lead to negative developmental cascades, I believe that a thoughtfully orchestrated program can lead to positive cascades and to successful reintegration and rehabilitation. We're beginning to see examples of this around the world. North Macedonia has implemented local multidisciplinary support teams to work with families. Kazakhstan has also welcomed back mothers and children as members of their society and has made significant progress in terms of family reunification, housing, jobs, and children's education. And Kosovo has demonstrated that government and civil society can work together to support successful social and economic reintegration of children and mothers. So these countries provide a few examples of how a whole of society multidisciplinary approach can work to successfully reintegrate children. Thank you. I will stop there and see if there are any questions. I do need to figure out how to end my screen share now.
There should be a button on the top, like you see a couple of signs.
There it is. I can stop sharing. Thank you so much.
Perfect. No problem.
Perfect. Thanks, Sophie. Thank you so much, Heidi. I think that was an excellent start, and I know that I have already a few questions, but we wanted to do the following. We wanted to give people an opportunity now to ask only questions that relate to understanding. So if there was anything that was unclear, or whether you need any clarification, this would be the moment to do so. And then we would ask everybody to keep the questions to have more of a discussion until we have heard all the inputs, if that is okay with you. But as far as I can see, there are no questions in the Q&A section as of yet. I'm seeing something coming now, but I think Vasileios asked a question, but I think this will be something, I hope he also agrees, that we will be addressing that hopefully later on. So if for now there are no questions pertaining to understanding, because I think also everything was very clear, then I thank you again, Heidi, at this moment, and we will move over to Valbona, to Kosovo. And we welcome also our fellow other panelists, Kaan and Lotta. Great that you are joining us. Moving over to Valbona. Oh, and sorry, Valbona, I completely forgot to introduce you. I will do that now. So Valbona works as a psychiatrist at the... Sorry? I will go on. At the University Clinical Center of Kosovo, and at the same time is the coordinator for health and mental health for radicalized persons and violent extremists, and as well as children and women returning from Syria. She has also 12 years of experience in the Kosovo Correctional Services, which is a high security prison with a focus on the treatment and research of radicalized persons. And in cooperation with the Reintegration and Rehabilitation Department within the Ministry of Internal Affairs in Kosovo, she has led the construction of a plan for the treatment and rehabilitation of women and children returning. With that being said, now I hand over to you, Valbona.
Thank you. Thank you, Alexandra. Now I'm going to share my presentation for the first. I think it's my presentation, yes. Hi for everyone. Thank you, Alexandra, for invitation to be part of that conference. In my presentation, it's the work, what we're working, and the cooperation with another institution. We work in Kosovo with the returners, children, women, and FTF, where we're working in Kosovo with them. Everything has gone through the preparation plan draft and detailed for each involved institution in this plan. For this, the persons who returns from Syria, it's responsible, it's a division for prevention and reintegration of radicalization persons, which I am a part of this division. It's the structure of health institution is University Clinic Center of Kosovo, psychiatrist clinics, the principal centers of family medical care, and National Institute Public of Health. They are the part of working with the persons they are returns. And the best part in that, it's a mental health, who work with the children, women, family, and FTF. The Mental Health Center of Children for Children and Adolescents, as well adult psychiatrists from the clinic, have allowed the condition of returning women and children, which is still currently continue with a detailed plan for each other to work with children, mother, parents, and families who are the important to work with them. Sorry. After resettlement, whether their families are housing provided by Ministry of Internal Affairs, we began clinical visits and initiate clinical seasons with the returns of their homes to help with reintegration. During this time, all returnees were offered other medical treatment service as needed or requested by medical advisors. During this period of medical treatments, we mostly encountered problems with children's health due to environmental and reintegration change. Another problem was with the diet change when they come in Kosovo. Since in Syria they were malnourished. Most frequent issues were diarrhea, bronchitis, and tonsil pharyngitis. We also provide plastic surgery for service to children who are wanted with aim of removing one's scares. Our hope is of helping them forget to the war traumas, because we have some children, they have in hands and they have in a face some things from Syria. Other difficulties in relation to women returned from Syria had to do with specific requirements in relation to health treatments, such as they insist that the health personnel who will carry out the health examination be females. Another problem we faced with returned women was the adaptability to their family space. In this regard, we have begun evaluation children as they have been the goal of treatment. Child psychiatrists have begun evaluation children at the child psychiatric clinic, which has helped the children prepare for the school. In addition to children in the same period, we have focused in the medical diagnosis of returned women, as well as the treatment in terms of mental health. The most common types of disorder encountered in returned women are PTSD, adjustment disorders, personality disorders, and anxiety and depressive together. Also, structure and employment institution are Ministry of Education, Science, Technology, and Innovation, Center for Social Worker, and municipal directors of education. Structure of religion institution, Islamic Community of the Republic of Kosovo. A priority structure of NGOs, non-governmental organization. List of identified needs, the need to practice psychological and psychiatricism by applying the method of assessment and psychological testing, the need to carry and recreation, sports, cultural and education activities, the need to understand the change in children behavior and the eventual concerns experiences in the community, family, and school. They need to understand the change in behavior of women and the eventual concern expressed in the community and family. They need to clear the ground where the role of family and community to be hospitable and not judgment them. They need to train multidisciplinary staff in different institutions that have access to returned children and women. From the second group of identified needs, activities have been developed in order to contribute to the well-being and food education of children. So we have access as follows: outdoor walking, study visit, playground. The exposure platform has been valuable in monitoring mental health, in particular children behaviors and their future development and improvement. From the third group of identified needs, activities have been developed to contribute to the well-being in the future education of women. So we have access as follows: development of necessary competentions for facilitate access to the community, development of employed skills. This exposure platform has been valuable in monitoring by mental health, in particular recognize the degree of adaptation to the community and their future development and improvement. Also, we have a fourth group of identified needs. Trainings were developed in order to increase the capacity of multidisciplinary staff and religious clerics who through their role and work with the children and women have contributed to the well-being and future formation for children. So we exit as fellow offering training for teachers from the pre-university, social workers, probation service, and religion and access and through return children and identify radicalization behavior. This platform of professional development of important actors has been valued in and development children in school. Also, during the treatment of mental health, is important to build trust in professional mental health staff. This confidential building increases the level of results in the relation to the stage such as rehabilitation and reintegration of returnees. A critical role in the example of good practitioner is the inter-institutional approach and the cooperation, children's education and performance and enhancement in learning. enable women to take on important roles in the family, generation income for the family. Impacts are positives and practictionary when working with target groups, showing new potential for managing challenging situation. Further development of critical thinking on the analysis of specific situation in relation to specific targets and their physics social impact. Further development in a new spectrum with dose of adaptation and invocation of psychiatric seasons. Thank you. I finished. You listen to me? You hear me?
Yes, we
Okay.
listened to you, we heard you, and we thank you very much for these insights from Kosovo. I think it is just fascinating, just the amount also just of persons that you are engaging with, right? That is a much larger group than in any other European country at the moment. So I'm sure that there will be quite a few questions to you later on. For now, as we did before, please, if you have any questions regarding your understanding of anything that Rabona explained, please raise them now. I'm seeing that nobody has been using the Q&A section thus far. If this doesn't work for you for any reason, you're also very free to use the chat. Please do also make use of that. I see Vasileios has another question. We will raise that later on, as it is again a question relating to content. And I think it's great if we can already move on to our next input, because this means that later on we will have more time to discuss the contents of what was said. So again, Rabona, thank you so much. And we will move over to our third speaker of the day. Kaan, special welcome to you today, and special thank you for being with us today. You're gonna give us a little talk on reintegration rehabilitation from experience of working in Germany. And just to introduce you very briefly, Kaan Orhan is a Islamic studies researcher and head of the Bonn office of the counseling center Grüner Vogel, which means green bird. He supports relatives of radicalized persons as well as the persons themselves if they have come to look for help to exit. That being said, the floor is yours. You are still muted, I think.
Now it should work. I heard you in the end. Maybe you can.
Can you hear me now?
Yes. Great.
So thank you very much. Thank you for the invitation and the chance to participate. And I will share a few slides, but nothing very. I'm sorry, I'm not really familiar with WebEx. I just have to.
Otherwise, we can also very quickly, if you want, send them to.
Let's try this. I think it might take up less time. I'm trying to start already to guide you through some of the work that is being done in Germany by myself and others. Now.
We're very, very good on time, so no worries at all.
Okay. Still, all the more sorry I am for holding up the process now. Minutes. So now, as it has been said, I'm working in a caseworker capacity, which means that I'm working directly with the returnees in addition to the families. I've sent out the presentation now. I hope it reaches you okay. I've been doing this work since 2015. It started with prevention mostly and family counseling, and it transitioned not by design, but more or less by it of itself, beginning in the years 2017, 2018, because more and more of the women in the camps, through mediation of their families, contacted us directly. and we started working with them while they were still in the camps. And now, since Germany has fortunately, belatedly instituted at least a limited policy of returns, we get the chance to work with them directly in the capacity here as well. I should mention that we have been doing this work as a project since 2011, so quite a few years before I joined. And the methods, the methodology, and concepts we chiefly work with have been developed even earlier, around 2000, so quite a little more than 20 years ago, for family counseling and disengagement work with militant right-wing extremists in Germany, with the German neo-Nazi and extreme right-wing scene. These concepts have been adapted and put to work in the religiously motivated extremism field as well. And we offer a wide degree of things, of practical help to reintegrate foreign terrorist fighters and their families. This includes trying to set them up with psychological support programs. We used to have a psychologist in our team as well. Unfortunately, the position is unoccupied at the moment, so we can't provide this type of counsel ourselves. But we try to put them up with external experts in psychological support, mental health support. We do provide lawyers. We are in contact with, especially since we have an issue in Germany with lawyers who are themselves connected to or proper members of the extremist Islamist scene. So we do try to prevent people ending up with the wrong type of lawyer. We do also work on behalf of courts and attorneys while the mothers, for example, are still imprisoned. Yes, we try to, perfect. Thank you very much. This is mostly the description of our work. I think we can skip the first one as well. I'm very happy to leave it with you for everyone who wants to look out the facts. I've seen in the Q&A that there was already a question on returnees that Germany has received. In this case, we have to differentiate between two groups. As the slide says, we have way above 400 returnees already, but a significant number of those have returned on their own volition and quite early. So we started getting the first returnees a very short while after they left for Syria, because they didn't find there, ideologically speaking, what they were looking for because of injury or illness that they wanted to cure in Germany, other personal or family reasons. So before the camps were established, before the fall of ISIS, we already have a significant number of people who have returned by themselves. The usual way was to make it over the Syrian-Turkish border and apply for help at the German embassy in Ankara or a German consulate in Turkey. As far as proper returnees by government sponsorships, so to speak, are concerned, this is a group of less than 50, I think, so less than 1/10 of the returnees from Syria and Iraq have been returned by the state. We had a fairly large group this October. This included many of the cases we counsel. So we accompanied the relatives to the airport and took the children, supported the families as they took the children into their care. Most of the women, I think 7 of 8, were arrested immediately. So there was no immediate contact with the women. We tried to establish contact as soon as possible in the prison. But all the children have been given to relatives that we accompanied to the airport. There has been a way smaller returnee action last year around Christmas time. I think that was 11. Yeah, I think it was 11 or 12 people, 3 women and a number of children. This time we had 8 women and upwards of 20 children. And they have limited returns. There have been limited returns by way of repatriation from Turkey and Iraq also, people who have been imprisoned there. So still we are talking about less or maybe a tenth of the returnees in Germany have been recently returned by the German government. Most of the others have returned sometimes years ago on their own volition. We still have upwards of 100, I think 140 people in the camps. The number, especially of men in prisons, is much more uncertain. In numbers of women and children, we don't know everyone, obviously, but we have a fairly good idea who's still coming back. There is a lot of opposition, so it has took a very long time to have any returns organized by the government. And right now you have medical emergencies, you have people, women who kidnapped children to Syria, who have a parent or relative here who has who should be legally the guardian of the child. So things that can be termed as emergency returns. There is still no commitment to repatriating all Germans in the camps, all women and children on principle in the very near future. This is something that we really hope and try to lobby for. In Germany, there is a very large and very diverse scene of disengagement programs, of programs working with these returnees. You have proper state-run programs that are coming from security force background, from domestic intelligence or police background. You have proper civil society actors who still are state-funded, like we ourselves. And you have mixed concepts that are much more of a state-civil society partnership. You have different approaches. Some projects do seek out returnees actively and try to get them involved. We are, as has been mentioned in the introduction, a project that's working a passive approach. We do not seek out people to get them to commit to disengagement, but rather we counsel those who from their own free will contact us and ask for help, which still is a large number. We are probably working, we have 80 open cases at the moment between 5 counselors in Berlin and Bonn, and I would say that upwards of 80% of these 80 cases are returnee cases. So the other things we used to do, family counseling of people who are in the process of radicalizing, this is to a very large amount dried up, or it has been taken over by dedicated primary prevention projects, and we are left with returnees and foreign terrorist fighters. Next slide, please. There is still a lot of work to do, especially in state NGO relations. I'd say that Germany is quite ahead of other people, of other countries. I've been told from practitioners, for example, during the RAN meetings, that civil society work especially is more difficult in their country than in Germany, apparently. Still, especially if you look into prison work, it's still more difficult for a civil society project, for an NGO to go into a prison than for a security force project. Obviously, there is more distrust, there is more, there is a bigger deficit of information. There is no federal or even a state structure that would, for example, be a guidance for prison authorities on which projects to work with. Because we do also have prisoner projects run by extremists. So we have projects that actively try to prevent disengagement and to provide services like lawyers, like counseling, like financial support to families of imprisoned people in the context of extremist activity. So that's one of the reasons why there is a certain amount of mistrust against NGOs. Still, this could be worse, but there is still some room for improvement. There's little awareness, or not as much as I would hope, on how long-term the approach with children has to be. So we are expecting problems to pop up years and years into the future when these children who are maybe 2, 3, 4 years old now, when they enter school, when they try to come to terms with their family history, for example, when they are old enough to research their parents on the internet. And we already have cases here in Bonn of schools or daycare centers who get anonymous tips that one of the children attending a class or a group is the child of an ISIS returnee. This is usually creating a lot of problems. We had threats against such institutions that children would be taken out if the terrorist child was not removed. And there's a lot of stigma obviously attached. It has been mentioned in the prior presentation and I think states like Kosovo and other states in the Western Balkans or Central Asia and many other countries are far ahead of Germany and other Western European countries in the sense of accepting these people back as a part of their society. It has, I think, in a very large part to do with the fact that many, though by no means all, people who left for Syria and Iraq have a migration background, as it's termed in Germany, so are children or grandchildren of immigrants. There is, in many sectors of society, media and politics, refusal to accept responsibility for the radicalization of these people in German society. You have the same arguments as you have in other countries, for example, in Britain, of removing German citizenship from dual citizens, something which I think is very, very harmful, not only in the individual cases, but also it's a recruitment tool for further extremist activity, because it reinforces narratives that as a Muslim or a migrant, you are not a proper German. So the stigma both before return and after is immense and is a considerable challenge. And partly resulting from this stigma, there is also challenges in building perspectives. We still have no realistic perspective, for example, of an ISIS returnee to get a meaningful employment that could support possibly a large family a mother has to raise by herself. It's still difficult for girls who left at the ages 15, 16, 17 to get back into education, to get a qualified leaving certificate from an education institution. There are issues with the schooling of the children who maybe 10 to 12 years now and have missed several years of schooling. There is the problem of people who actually find jobs, of being outed, so to speak, as an ISIS returnee and losing these jobs. This is something that has happened quite a lot with Shabab returnees as well. We have a fairly large Somali community here, and I've also worked with Shabab returnees, and we had many cases where co-workers Googled them and employment opportunities were lost. Another issue that is often overlooked, and this is the last one and then I'm finishing, is apart from employment, there is also the issue of family, of building new partnerships. If, for example, the returnee women are divorced or are widows, there's a tendency of, here in Germany, the women I work with, to very soon, and also because specifically the difficulties in finding employment, of considering marriage as a possible route to re-establish social security and a secure material existence. And marriage in Germany for an ISIS returnee outside of the extremist community that obviously still exists and actively tries to reconnect with these women is difficult. By the way, for men as well. I've worked with 2 men who are not returned foreign terrorist fighters, but who have been jailed for terrorist offenses, in domestic terrorist offenses in connection with jihadist ideology, that have sought to marry and have been rejected by prospective in-laws because of their relations. But for women, especially if they have returned with children they have to care for, I think it's a considerably larger challenge still, that not only are employment prospects dim, but also social reintegration and possibly a new marriage or partnership. This is something that pops up a lot in talks with these women, and also in trying to reestablish their social existence. I hope I didn't take too much of your time, and especially I apologize for the technological difficulties in the beginning, and I'm looking forward to your questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Khan. I think there was so much in there that I'm sure we will later follow up on. I think also to extend this idea of what does everybody working in the multi-agency setting need to know, which was one of the first questions I had also during Heidi's talk, is what do we need to do with the receiving societies, and how do we not just work with everybody involved, but with the general public as well. So let's address this later on. For now, again, as we did before, if you have any questions right now to clarify, but I think you were very clear. I don't see any questions immediately now. So with that being said, let's move on. Yes, you have a question yourself?
No, but I'm seeing one in the Q&A. I don't know if all panelists see the same Q&A or if you see an individual one, but here I have a question. Do you see it? Do you want to read it out, or should I?
We see the question, but we would like to address it later on to all of you, because then we can really get into the content discussion, and we don't have to exit it anymore for more input, actually. So we will first move over to Helsinki and to Lotta, where we've actually yesterday had a fantastic study visit. So you're in for a treat to hear again from our Finnish colleagues. Lotta is working as a team member in the Helsinki Deaconess Foundation in the Exit 2020 project. As an exit worker, she's doing client work, clinical supervision and consultations. She has a background in war trauma and torture rehabilitation, and is further educated in war crime investigation. She's a psychotherapist and counselor, and also an active expert of the RAN Health Working Group. Welcome, Lotta, and we're looking forward to hearing from you about trauma-informed care for child returnees.
Thank you so much for having me. It's really a pleasure. Hold on, I'll share my screen. Yes, hold on. Yes, I would like to have a short presentation about working with the families returning to Finland. And I would like to start to tell a little bit about our project. For now, about 1 year, we have had a project Exit 2020 in the Helsinki Deaconess Foundation. We're an NGO working with building up a network in Finland around exit work, and also we have developed a manual around exit work, and we support the families, not necessarily being in any de-radicalization process, but in general support. So the support has been everything from carrying furniture to deep discussions around religion, ideologies, and traumas. So I would like to start a little bit about my expectations when I started to work with the families. I have a background working with child soldiers, so I was a bit surprised when there was quite much fear and stigma, and I thought that there's a huge amount of war trauma also. So I was curious as well, and we have done a lot of home visits, most because reaching our clients would have been quite impossible of having them invited somewhere, because a mother that has many children and would be like taking herself and the children to a project would have been really challenging. So we decided we go on home visits, and we went and we saw the war traumas. They were obvious there. So what we found first was at the physical part, quite much of the malnutrition and so on that has been also quite much in the literature. You have probably read some about that as well. There was bones that had to like really like physical care had to be there in the beginning, and I'm always surprised about Bona's presentation when she talks also about the plastical surgery that was included. We didn't have any of that in Finland, but I do hope at some point we also could involve that in our reintegration process. And yes, in school I could talk a little bit about that, but first of all, I would like to address the dysregulated parents. I had parents discussing that every time there's an airplane flying over, my stomach takes a turn and I don't know really where I am. So parents really describing their war trauma, and also the children listening to this, how much of the dysregulation was then also attached to the child. And hand in hand with that, I would say psychosomatics would go. There was quite much of psychosomatic symptoms that we worked with as well. When the parent was dysregulated, scared with a headache, there would be a child also dysregulated, scared with a headache. So as we have heard in the earlier presentations today, there was already quite much also of the attachment ruptures, which means that the children had already lost a lot, lost people around them, lost parents, and also if the primary caretakers were already for some reason not present, and there were other mothers that had taken care of the children, they were also separated because of not being their biological parents, which meant another attachment rupture. So there is always this to think of when you think of long-term support. The traumas will always be there and always be activated again and again and again. So, and as we heard also, there will be times when the children will read about their parents. There will be these moments when the awareness comes, and also then again how to work with a youngster's identity around that. Also the discussions around the identity of being stateless, I would address, forms a child's thoughts of oneself. And also if you need to protect the child to have an alternative name, for example in school or in other places where you should protect the child from being recognized, to also be aware of how it affects one's identity to have multiple names, different names in different settings. Just as a small notice. we did not have any systematic mental health care offered more than the municipality offers for all Finnish citizens. So it's voluntary and can be used when needed. So we also informed of this. And also the thought of talking about identity crises and young persons. If we, for example, as the girls we just heard, they have had so much responsibility in the camps. They have done a lot of the homework. They might even have been married. And going back from 16 of being quite responsible already to a society where you are a child makes the identity even more confusing. Where should I be? And also, of course, because of the freedom that has been felt in the camps, in a way of freedom of being an adult, to have to go back to being a sort of a child because you're under 18 can confuse. This is just the small things I've noticed around working with the children and the youth, and it can really lead also to quite difficult states of wanting to go back and not wanting to integrate. And that's why my last point here at this slide is to address also how religion shapes in this context. I wasn't quite aware of religion, Islam, religion per se. So I would have had use of more knowledge of being in a position of a trusted person, and also sort of being a trusted person and not having the knowledge of religion. So I would emphasize that it would be good to have at least the basic knowledge of the context. It do helps a lot, but of course can be pros and cons there as well. And then we developed a national modeling for arranging long-term support. If you read the last spotlight of RAN, the magazine, you can find the manual there. So it's a great use because there's also like a bit of traumas and age, and also long-term support, because I think that's a quite important issue of really working on the long term. As a small point here, also the trauma-informed care. We heard some mentions about that already. You might have heard this already. I find it interesting that we discuss multi-agency. It's really a key word. But then again, everybody have professions in their own profession, so to say. Everybody has their own field, and it can be quite difficult to really work multi-agency. So I would address that as well, to be curious about one's others fields, and really look into how we could work on the safety and the trust and transparency. And I do address trust here really as one really important thing. Also the peer support. And when you work in group settings, it can also, when it comes to returnees, it can be a question of like timing, that it won't be like just a group of sharing the trauma bonds, that it would really have a sort of a more of a rehabilitative aspect there. Anyway, collaboration is of course necessary, empowerment, and also to give a voice and a choice. It always broadens up the perspective if there is a choice. As soon as you don't have it, you can be quite narrow in the thoughts as well. And just as a last, last really clinical point of view, if you work with a client, have a look if there is any symptoms of not being present, because it makes the work so much harder. So check for optimal levels of functioning. If you need to have that form filled in and the person is not present because of the stress levels, check that you might have the person in the room with, for example, putting something in the person's hand. Give a pen. Maybe ask what kind of a color do you think this pen is? For me it looks like blue. What does it look for you? So you can have the person present, bring the person back if there's much hyper arousal, and also hypoarousal, which I would say could be, won't say anything there, but when it comes to persons that have war trauma, there's quite much freeze responses and quite numb and quite much lack of emotion. So it's usually, but then again, it can shift from red to blue and back to red and then a little bit yellow quite fast. So this is just as a small notice as well. And this could be discussed many hours, but I'd love to thank you now. And if there's any questions, just please ask. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lotta, for your excellent presentation, and for all of our speakers. We're so grateful for your valuable contributions. Yes, exactly. I wanted to invite you to turn on your cameras again, as we're now going to open the floor also to the participants who can keep on asking questions in the chat or in the Q&A function. I feel like, yeah, we now made a full circle as Heidi Ellis started by speaking on the role trauma plays when what we have to consider when we design rehabilitation programs specifically for child returnees, and then Valbona and Khan, who took us into their like local or country context, so to say. And Lotta, thank you for speaking on yeah, the situation in Helsinki and Finland, and also for sharing with us your insights on trauma-informed practice. So we have a very, I think, a bold question from one of the audience members. Heidi, I would like to address this question to you in the beginning. And the attendee would like to know what are the basic knowledge everyone needs to know in order to work together on a specific case of a child returnee. If you could maybe briefly elaborate on that, it would be awesome.
Yeah, that's a wonderful question. And I'm assuming we're talking about how a multidisciplinary team could work together on this. I think, I do think some basic shared understanding of trauma is important. Everyone doesn't need to know the details of how you approach, but understanding what trauma looks like, how it manifests, the kinds of supports that can be helpful to dampening that trauma response. I think all of that should be common knowledge. And that, I think, is what Lotta was getting at with trauma-informed care, is not just about a trauma clinician. It's about a system that has an awareness. So I think there's sort of a basic literacy in trauma that's needed. But I also think there's cross-learning that needs to happen across different disciplines. And I'm a big believer in the idea that the more kind of trust building you can do within a team, the better that team is going to function. And part of that is understanding the language that different disciplines are using, and the missions that they're trying to carry out, and where there's shared overlap, and where, you know, the goals of different agencies diverge. And so doing some cross-training, so I'm almost answering your question more in process than content. I think there is some shared content knowledge, but there's a lot of process that needs to happen around building a sense of team and shared vision and trust within agency members. And some of that is learning a little bit about each other's disciplines, so that we understand when you say, when you use the term, I don't know, a term like risk, what do you mean? What do I mean? Because it's not always the same thing.
Thank you so much. I think, yeah, you rightfully pointed out that maybe even when we think of working in these multi-stakeholder teams, it is in the beginning to think of the process rather than the content. We recently had a meeting with our local multi-agency setting in Germany, and they were like, yeah, in the beginning it's difficult to decide on topics because so much is also then reaction to what happens, what comes out in conversations. So it's more like transferring processes in general. Lotta, would you like to add on what your colleague Heidi Ellis just elaborated on?
Not really. It was really a good point there with trust building, because that's also something that might be transmitted to workers when there's a lot of fear, a lot of stigma, a lot of maybe even paranoia around who is doing what. It can be much unclear, which also can be spread in the multi-agency teams. The feeling of not being heard or said, and also have like your own feeling of not being heard and said in the team. It's very common. So to really work on the trust in the team, I think that's an excellent point, Hedy. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lotta. Another question that was asked by one of the attendees was, and which is a bit related to what you just said, because I mean, the network sometimes has specific hierarchies. And the question that was asked to Valbona is if the Mental Health Center of Kosovo has the coordination of the entire process, or who is in charge, if there's like anyone who is at the top of the hierarchy, so to say, of this multi-agency network. Valbona, maybe you could yeah, answer that question.
Mental health is involved in coordinating with another part of the rehabilitation or integration returnees. We are involved in every thing, because the mental health is the important part to treatment and in rehabilitation. And also in Kosovo, we are part and coordination with the whole of the process.
Thanks, Valbona. I'm just looking at my colleagues because I saw in the chat that you were muted in the beginning, but could you hear Valbona? Because I could hear you. If you
hear me now?
Yeah, we can hear you. Yeah.
Now you hear me.
Yes.
The mental health is involved in the whole process with the returnees. We coordinated everything with the Division for Integration and Rehabilitation. The University Clinic, the team who work in University Clinic in Kosovo, they work with the returnees. They treatment the returnees. We are involved in a whole process.
That's
you hear me?
Yes, yeah, we heard you. Thank you so much for elaborating on that, and it's interesting to hear. And can I ask a follow-up question? So, if there's any specific decision to be made with regarding one specific case or one specific returnee, who usually has the authority to decide that? It might be that.
Sophia, can you repeat the question, because I have problem with the internet? You speak with me.
Sure. Yeah. I'm going to repeat it. I was just curious if you if we look at one specific returnee case, so to say, and if there has to be like, if a decision has to be made regarding yeah, that person's situation, the schooling, whatsoever, who is usually in charge of taking that specific decision? does it depend on the context, or is it the authorities?
For example, for children to start the school, maybe I accept the question. Who in charge with them is the first step is the psychiatrist child, who work with the children and see and testing and everything doing with the children to know he is okay to start the school or not. When we take the decision for the children, or for example, the children, and they go in a school, we work with the teacher and psychologists of a school, how to deal, how to charge with the children and to work with them. That is the line who going.
That makes it much clearer. Thank you, Valbona. And I see in the chat that you also have greetings to Lotte and Valbona. So I guess there's already attendees that know each other, which is always very nice. And a question I would now like to ask to Ken, which I'm also seeing in the chat, is whether you know if there are any good practices or inspiring practices with multi-agencies or multi-agency teams that are working with imprisoned parents. Ken, do you have any insights on that?
On a very limited basis, I'd say yes. So you usually have a person responsible in German prisons for integration, as it's called. So again, it's very it has a slight political bent, so it's supposed to address people with a migration background. And for example, it sometimes has rather perplexing results. For example, when they ask German converts to do integration courses and stuff like that. But in very many cases, these people are really, really great for networking within the prison. So they are usually the ones who refer us to inmates who have not heard of us previously. They do network between, for example, youth care, childcare authorities, disengagement projects, parents and relatives, and my work with them has mostly been very, very positive. So, for example, if certain rules are getting in the way of our counseling work, for example, you have that has just happened in the last couple of days. A returnee woman from the group that came back on October 6th. She wanted to have a child, to have a children visit her, and for security regulations concerning the pandemic, they said that she could bring on her sister, who was taking care of the children, could bring only one child. So it's understandable on a certain level, but in the given circumstances, there was not that much more risk in two small children who were carried in how do you call it, in a stroller, than one. And the parents, the family who cares for the children, the prison, myself and youth care, we all got together. The prison authorities actually relented. So there are quite a lot of examples, but again, prison is one of the most difficult to work terrains, especially for NGOs. So I'm sorry to say that I probably have more bad examples or bad experiences than good, but it's picking up. So there is a positive development, certainly.
Yeah, thank you. It's always great to hear the honest opinion about the current state of play regarding specific programs. So we definitely know that we will need to follow up on this in the future. Heidi Ellis, do you have any experiences with that in the United States that you might know of regarding multi-stakeholder teams that work within correctional facilities with imprisoned parents?
My short answer is no, and so I'm not going to take any more time on that. I think, you know, we have teams that work pre and post with youth who are at risk or individuals at risk for extremism, but I am not personally familiar with in the correctional setting. Doesn't mean it doesn't exist, but I'm not familiar with it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you for your answer. And maybe related to that, we had another question in the Q&A section regarding risk assessment. So if any of you know if and how risk assessment tools are being used specifically regarding child returnees and the threats they may pose. I'm looking at you, and you can all feel free to answer if any of you have information on that. Ken, do you know about the German situation?
I just wanted to say I'm unfamiliar with any case of the commonly used risk assessment tools being used on a returnee child. So it has not happened, to my knowledge, certainly not in any of the cases we counsel. There is youth care, child care practitioners on the scene at the event of repatriation. So they also send people to the airport for like a short inspection. Much of the work is done beforehand, but they have a short inspection of how the children appear physically, psychologically, before they are released to the parents. And then after that, it's also open to the parents if they, for example, want to take any psychological help for the children. We always strongly advise them to do so, but there is nothing being done like from the police or intelligence services on like doing a risk assessment for the child, even with the older ones. So we had in the recent group a 12-year-old boy. There has been a lot of talk beforehand of boys in his age group possibly having had some kind of training, either ideological or military, and being a risk, but nothing has been done. No interviews, no visits, specifically in regards to risk assessment. And as I said, I'm not familiar with the common risk assessment tools being used on the returnee children, no.
And if we think of it from another perspective, maybe not a security-oriented perspective, but the risk that the children might face when they return or when they're repatriated, how would you like estimate which measures are in place? What are authorities or involved actors usually look at when it comes to the risk of the child in this new environment, or the environment they formerly knew before they left to Syria and Iraq?
There is a lot of different concepts or measures that are on offer, but again, it's all voluntary in our case, certainly, but also the youth workers, unless there is really ample evidence that the child is, for example, mistreated or neglected, they are not forcing anything. They are offering so-called helps to, I don't know how it would be the best way to translate it, Hilfen zur Erziehung, like child's upbringing support strategies, for lack of a better term. I'll try to think of something, but they are being offered to the returnee women, and they are free to adapt to adopt any of them or to refuse. Psychological services are offered, but have to be taken up by the parents again. And institutionally, there is not much really. We have tried to, for example, work on municipal authorities, with municipal authorities to, if papers for the children have to be made from scratch, because obviously there are no birth certificates, no passports, any means of identification of, for example, not putting Raqqa or Mosul or Baghuz as a birthplace, because that would be an issue, as I said, maybe years down the road. There is no possibility for that, apparently. Sometimes there are ways around it. So, for example, when it was put in where the child came from to Germany, we put Kuwait instead of Syria, because the plane had a stopover in Kuwait on the return to Germany. But institutionally, like in documentation or in administrative measures, there is really not so much. In terms of psychological care and support, there is quite a lot, but it depends on the parents, the mothers, if they want to take it up.
If I can just add, I think it's helpful to think about assessments as being not just risk assessments, but strengths, risks, and needs. And when you start broadening out like that, thinking about the protective factors that I listed out, there are a number of potential strengths that can be bolstered that can have a real impact on long-term trajectories. And also in terms of engagement, I think you mentioned that, and that's a really important piece to think about, because you can have a great program, but if someone doesn't engage, then it doesn't really matter. If we are focused too much on risk, what family is going to want to engage? On the other hand, if we're really focused on the strengths that families are already bringing, the needs that they have, and offering support that's in direct response to those, I think we're reducing risk. And I'm not saying we don't need to assess for risk, but I think we need to be broader than that and take on strengths and needs.
Yes, thank you for that. And there was another question in the chat or in the Q&A earlier on, Heidi, directly to you, because you introduced the model earlier on. And one person was asking, even though, of course, we don't always assume a specific risk coming from refugees or young refugees, the person was asking if, to some respect, the model you introduced was applicable also to unaccompanied minors.
Yes, and I should say, that's actually more the population that the model was initially developed around, and then I've done thinking over time about how it applies in different contexts. So our center has done a lot of work thinking both with unaccompanied and families who are arriving, unaccompanied children and families who are migrating. So it's very applicable.
Thanks a lot. I'm looking to you, to all the panelists. Is there anything that you would like to share? We're already approaching the end of the session for today, but you can also feel free to ask each other a question if you would like, or if you have a final comment on the topic for now.
I just sent you one more question, Sophie.
Perfect. Then maybe we will start with that, and then we can move on to final statements, so to say. So this question was to Khan, but also to others. The attendee is asking or saying that it was highlighted that long-term success of reintegration depends on the public perception and also the fundamental influence of stigmatization, as these are quite challenging phenomena. So the question is, what can or needs to be done with this regard, and by whom, and what might be appropriate and a realistic role for NGO practitioners? So you have 2 or 3 questions in one, Khan.
Very good question. I think one of the most crucial that one can ask at the present moment in time concerning this topic. You'd have several actors who need to, or who it would be helpful if certain actors started or stopped framing this issue in a certain sense. This concerns politicians. We had a lot of issue in Germany with politicians speaking of returnee children as tomorrow's suicide bombers and the time bombs in the classroom. This goes up to the way to federal institutions. To visible people from a security force background, from the domestic intelligence, for example, that used these impressions. You have a media that is very focused on the risk that these people pose, which is in no relation to proper facts. Obviously, there is, because the phenomenon is fairly recent, there is not a huge amount of study. But what you can have, there was a study presented on a meeting in Brussels fairly recently that talked about like a 2-point-something recidivism rate in returnees concerning terrorist crimes. And this is like way below any rate for most other crimes. So the risk is not coming from the returnees. Here in Germany, we had a number of attempted and carried out terrorist incidents connected to ISIS ideology, but none of them were carried out by a returnee. And I said we have a 3-digit number for years, and none of the attacks has been carried out by a returnee. There have been a few in Belgium, in the UK, but they are viewed, I think, way out of proportion in terms of who's carrying out most of the attacks, namely people who never left to Syria. So you have media, you have politics, you have also certain segments of civil society that, for whatever reasons, try to view these people as a security risk, even if they are committed to disengagement. This is something we have seen in the past concerning right-wing extremists as well. 10 years after they disengaged from the scene, they have still been outed and pushed out of employment, for example. So, and also one last point, because I know I'm going on too long, but for example, institutions, state institutions that fund programs like us should be more open to employing former foreign terrorist fighters who have disengaged in, I don't know, counter-narrative work or stuff like that. This is being done, has been done for years, if not decades, again, with right-wing extremists. As I said, we have developed our work methods from a project in this field, and they have been working with so-called formers for ages, if I may say so. And they do prevention work. They go into schools, they go into, I don't know, various forums to talk about their disengagement. And at present, in Germany, I can't see that happening with an ISIS returnee, especially not in a funded capacity. So there is also not the political will that I would like to see in employing formers in some kind of disengagement or counter-radicalization work.
Yeah, Khan, while you were speaking, there were 2 more questions popping up in the chat. So I think you raised a couple of points that also attract a lot of interest or are of great relevance. But one very practical question is if you could share the link to the report that you have mentioned that was recently introduced or presented in Brussels regarding the recidivism rate.
I certainly would love to do so, but I have to look it up myself because it was given in a presentation of another speaker. I'll be happy to look into that, to my notes from the Brussels conference, and maybe pass it on to you and you to the participants if I can work it out. But as I said, I've only taken the number now from a practitioner who presented in Brussels.
Yes, I think I know who you're referring to, and I will also, if you don't reach that person or you can't find it, I will do my best to find that report as well and to send it to you afterwards. And then a question to all speakers, and maybe Lotta could briefly answer on that, as you also have a sort of city-focused approach, and is there any program or project currently in place on how to prepare local communities for the reintegration of returnees? As most of the projects mentioned are more focused on returnees and their families.
No, not that I know of yet, but there might be a workshop coming on that one soon. So please have your ears open and eyes. because it's a really interesting point of view and really a focus for us now. So we have discussed this also in our team, and with different stakeholders. We might come back to you on that one. So it's really good to know that there is interest around this. Thank you.
Also, just very, very briefly, there was a small scale event yesterday that also focused on communication when returnees return. So this would be another thing to keep your eyes open in the RAN publication section. But that sounds very interesting, Lotta. We are all going to wait for that invitation.
Yes, thank you for mentioning it. And yeah, as we are approaching the end of this webinar for today, I'm looking at you again. I know, Heidi Ellis, you earlier unmuted yourself when I was asking yeah, you to share some final thoughts. So sorry for interrupting with different questions that were popping up. But yeah, Valbona, sorry.
Yeah, sorry, just I like to answer to Anita for the question.
Of course.
We don't have any specific program how to prepare the communities, but what we do in our country, in Kosovo, we going in family, and we told, and we try to learn how to be careful how to approach with returnees, how to speak, what to ask and what not to ask, and everything. That is the things in our country function with the community, family.
Yeah, great. That
because it's a problem. It's a problem to have specific things, also to have specific programs, and with the returnees, women and children, to doing the sounds and everything, because they different from case to case. It's a different.
Yeah, so it seems most of the approaches that are currently in place are more focused on the individual or the family support and yeah, other aspects of rehabilitation. But we are staying curious for the event Lotta has mentioned, and also for the conclusion paper that will be published soon. So 3 times the charm, Heidi Ellis. Sorry. Now you're very welcome to give your final remarks.
Thank you. And first of all, I want to thank my fellow panelists. I've just learned so much, and what a wonderful group doing important work. So thank you. I was just thinking as we were talking, there's a balance that we need to hold in this work between clearly there are some unique needs and some particular needs of this population. On the other hand, I think it's important that we don't exceptionalize these children too much. And in many ways, what is going to be most helpful to them in their development is drawing on knowledge bases that we've had from, learned in other contexts, and something like a multidisciplinary team. That's one of the most effective approaches for healthcare, for other types of violence, for many different contexts. And so we have much already standing out there that we can draw on. And thinking about trauma and children who've experienced trauma and how to work with them, that's a knowledge base that is very deep. So I guess I just was thinking, as we do this work, let's try and think about how to do it in a way that doesn't exceptionalize them. And I think that also maybe is a little bit in response to the stigma question. These are just kids who have been through terrible times, and whose families are struggling to regain their footing and adjust to a new setting. And we need to think about all that we know about how we can help them so that they can do well and flourish. So thank you.
Yes, I was just thinking while you were speaking that exactly we emphasize so much on the fact that these children face stigma, but yes, when we take a very, very close look at them and exceptionalize them in that way, we might in some cases contribute to that stigma involuntarily, but of course it's still a super relevant topic, and I'm excited also to address this in the future. It has gotten dark in the meantime in Germany. The sky looks quite depressing. We would now like to close this webinar, and I would like to thank all of you panelists again for your super interesting contributions, which we're also excited to share on our YouTube channel as soon as this recording will be uploaded, as my colleague Alexandra has mentioned in the beginning, which brings me to thank her for organizing this event together with me, and for our colleague Anne, who was jumping in today for an ill colleague actually. So thanks for doing that. And Lotta, you've already mentioned earlier the returnee manual, and I can give you an update on that. It's currently being updated. So an updated version of the RAND returnee manual will soon be available in the upcoming months. We have a bunch of different papers and documents ready-made by RAN on returnees in general, but also specifically on child returnees and their mothers. So we will send you a small information package after this event. And for now, my colleague Alexandra will post a link for a survey in the chat. And we would be really grateful if you can just take 2 or 3 minutes of your precious time to fill it in, because it helps us a lot to improve future RAN events. So with that, thanks again so much also to our attendees, and we wish you all the best, and we hope you all stay healthy in these quite challenging times, and see you soon again, hopefully. Bye.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone. Thank you so much.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.